Everybody, welcome to our week number 2 video for Business 300, Organizational Behavior and Change. This week we're talking about situational analysis. So I'm going to give you my brief thoughts on the readings as well as discuss the assignments that are due this week, both the online discussion assignment as well as your organizational development project and the paper that's due on Saturday related to that. So we start off this week in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 covers identifying group change capacity. A few things that I want to point out here. When we're talking about A, B, C, and D players, I don't know if you've ever used that terminology in a work setting before, but I know I have. And in the context of this book, they do not mean the same things that they often mean in our everyday context. This is not about someone's performance. This is not about your feelings about them. This is really about how they rate on change capacity alone, and the other factors that are discussed as being crucial in the book. So please keep that in mind. But once you've assigned a letter grade to each of the people on your team, then what you're able to do is really look at the sum of your team and to kind of understand what strengths your team has, what potential weaknesses it has, and then to kind of develop a plan about what you're going to do about it. So a couple of things. Figure 4.1 in your book is actually pretty helpful. It's a group team matrix which allows you to plot your different team members on there. And it also pairs up with the second figure in this book, which or this chapter rather, which I'll discuss momentarily, which is figure 4.2, which brings together both your team's letter scores as well as some of their other strengths to complete. I'm sorry about that. I don't know if the video went out on your end, but it did on mine. Sorry. Anywho, so there's a few things to consider there. But again, figure 4.1 is really helpful as it allows you to plot your team out by their letter grades to kind of understand where the strengths and weaknesses kind of are. A couple of things about individual scores. Sometimes it may become necessary to change somebody's individual score. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I know I have in my workplace where I've kind of thought that someone had weaknesses in an area. And then I've watched them in a different project or a different scenario or for some other compelling reason, I have changed that judgment about this person. And in the case of this book, they also talk through those things. So when do we change a person's score? One of the big things is that when there's a needed skill that's really that person's kryptonite or their Achilles heel. So if, for instance, the project is human resources related and this person that you're expecting to be on your team and be a pivotal player is not strong in that area, you may need to downgrade them just due to the nature of the change that you're trying to drive. Another factor that could go into downgrading someone is what if they had major developmental needs. This doesn't necessarily mean that this person isn't well suited or couldn't rank as a or B player. However, it means that at this point in time, they do not have the needed skills and there's not enough time to actually get them those needed skills and time to implement them for your change process. That's really what we're after here. So although you may say, why count a developmental need against someone? I agree with you there. You shouldn't count a developmental need against someone, especially if you haven't given them the ability to develop that. However, in the case of a change capacity like this, where you're trying to implement change and trying to accomplish a goal, you also have to be realistic about what can get done in that time, as well as on the side, getting that developmental need taken care of for that person on your team. So that the next time around, hopefully they can play a more pivotal role. And another reason to downgrade someone would be that the changes are very specific and focused in an area of their expertise. So your book talks about an IT manager or an IT group and that the change process was related to that. And I sort of related that to an experience I had at a former workplace. I worked with an engineering manager, and he was a really good engineering manager. He knew engineering very well and was very well suited to that role. But unfortunately, if you took him outside of that role, you wound up with a big mess on your hands. That was his area of expertise. It was where he added value in our business. And so when projects came up, such as implementing new tracking systems to monitor how well our engineers were keeping up with their on time delivery to their internal customer, which was the production floor in this case, he was great at that. And so, in the case of him, I would have normally probably called him a C player, and in some cases, maybe even a D player, in the sense of some of the resistance that we experienced with him related to other change projects. But when it was related to his area of expertise, we didn't experience that. And so that's kind of, I tend to agree with them that if it's in someone's wheelhouse and you feel strongly that that's where they shine, then it may warrant a boost in the grades. I'm noticing that as I'm filming this that there's quite a little reflection off my glasses and on my face, so I apologize for that. I will try to pick a different setting to film this in next week so that hopefully we don't have that issue. And the last reason when you may want to downgrade someone's score would be if there's serious unanswered questions about that person. That could be whether they could handle a situation. It could be about a circumstance that's happening at work that leads you to question their judgment or their ability to do the role that you're wanting them to do. But those serious unanswered questions, if they're lingering and the group can't seem to move past them when grading this person, that is something to take into consideration as you're finalizing your grades for your team and starting to plot them on the matrix like what's in figure 4.1. A couple of other things. When you have this group discussion about people, you want to have an intelligent discussion. You don't want it to be based on stereotypes and things like that. It should be based on actual merit, what this person does, what this person contributes to your team, and whether or not they're well suited to the project. It really shouldn't be based on personal experiences in the sense of personalities and things like that, or based on your interpersonal relationship necessarily with that person, unless of course it's a red flag for other issues that could impact your project. But keep that in mind. You want it to be a lively discussion for people to be able to speak their mind, and for people not to come in with a preconceived notion of how they want to grade people. It really should be based on the process that's outlined in this book, and not necessarily how other people may feel you should grade players based on this A to D rating scale. Couple of other things. You really want to focus on what's their change response like, and then you want to look at those internal factors, those towering strengths and things like that that were introduced in the last week's readings. It may seem a little shocking, maybe not to some of you, and I don't think it's all that shocking, truthfully, but I think we tend to overestimate how well our teams may respond to change. In the book, they really talk about how 20 to 25% of the people on any given team are really C minus, D players. And so it is a big enough group that it does warrant quite a bit of consideration. And if you rank your team and they're all A's and B's, you probably need to go back and really look and to be sure that you're really giving a fair evaluation to each team member and to be honest with yourself about how comfortable you feel with them in the role that you're expecting them to fulfill in this change process. Finally, and what you'll do is in figure 4.2, it brings together two different matrices. So you'll plot the remaining factors about your team, and what you're able to look at is these patterns and to see whether you have mostly A's and B's, whether you have mostly C's and D's, and to kind of look at your team as a whole and what the strengths and opportunities kind of are there. Moving into Chapter 5, a couple of things that I want to point out there. Chapter 5 is about analyzing weak links. We know that we all have weak links on our team. It's very rare to find a team where everyone feels like everyone else is kind of rowing at the same pace. In reality, most teams have strong players. They have kind of people that are kind of flying under the radar, and then you have your weak links. And so it's important to look at those, and there's a few different ways that they suggest looking at this or even thinking about weak links. One of those is pivotal positions. So on any given change project, they estimate that about 10% of the positions are pivotal, meaning that if you select the wrong person or if that person for some reason doesn't work out in that role, that it can actually be detrimental to the entire project because that's how pivotal of a role they play. Um, when you're looking at these pivotal positions and trying to decide whether something is a pivotal position or is not a pivotal position, some things to consider. What's the ultimate goal of the change? That should drive and always be the motivating force behind how decisions are being made. What are you trying to accomplish? How are we going to get there? Next, you should have a target of about, like I said, 10% of your positions being pivotal. So if you have a team and there are 15 positions, then roughly rounding up, you want 2 of those positions to be considered pivotal or more. I wouldn't want to have too many pivotal positions, however. You really do want to aim for that roughly 10% goal. If you have a very small team, you may have to go up a little bit, but I would say round up to the next nearest number. You'd rather have more pivotal positions than is necessary than less. But again, you don't want to have too many either, such as every position can't be pivotal. Next, you also another way to look at this is to view it from a negative perspective. What would happen if I put the wrong person in this role? Would it be detrimental to the project? If the answer is nah, we'd probably get through and these other positions would help fill that in and we could work through it, then it's probably not a pivotal position. If instead, if that person were to be selected wrong or for whatever reason not work out, and it would be detrimental to the overall success of the change effort most likely, then that would be considered a pivotal position. Couple of other things. It's important to have backup people. Sometimes stuff happens. We all know that. People don't work out. People choose to leave. People have things come up in their life. People get sick. People have family obligations. Things come up. And so when you're looking at your team, you always kind of want to have a plan A and a plan B. I often do that with my own team. So for instance, right now, I have a very small team. So because of that, there's not a whole lot of resources to go around, and each decision that's made is really pivotal because there's not enough other people to fill in the gaps if that person fails. And so what I do a lot of the time is I'll first select who my top choice is to fill a role. Then I'll look at the other efforts that are going on and say, okay, does this person have the time, the ability, all these different factors to take on this other type of role or to be a more driving effort in a new change program. And so backups are important. Again, life is messy. Things don't always work out, even in your best laid plans, and that whether that's at home or at work, they just don't work out. So it's important to always be thinking about, well, if this doesn't work out, what will I do next? And if there really isn't a great backup, that gets into really assessing those A players, those key people for your project, and saying to yourself, how vulnerable are we to losing those people? I think we've all had that experience. I recently had that. We went through a major training effort to get hazardous materials trained to be able to ship and receive hazardous materials as a business. We spent a lot of money and trained a number of people. But a couple of people in the organization had to receive special, more in-depth training. And not weeks after we completed this training effort, which took months to implement, one of those people left. Although their departure for other facets of the business made sense, for this particular effort, they actually were very good at their job. They were a change agent, although they were problematic in other parts of their job. So I understand what happened. However, it was a crucial role, and we really weren't aware how vulnerable we were to that, as most of the discussions that were being had were confidential and things like that. And so, in my experience, when this happens, most of the time there are signs that you're vulnerable. So please do ask yourself, what is the marketability of a person? Can they just go out and find another job? Are they really good at what they do? And then ask yourself how satisfied they are with their job. Typically, people that are happy where they're at and they're marketable, but they're satisfied, there's no real incentive for them to want to leave, especially if you're giving them new opportunities and ways to help them grow. So keep those things in mind. A couple of other things. I'm not going to talk a lot about Chapter 6 because it's really about drawing a roadmap, but I do want to point out one of the figures that's in your book. So, let's see. So figure, oh, this isn't going to look very good, is it? Well, bear with me here. Nope, definitely not looking good. All right, well, this is figure 6.1, which is the roadmap itself. It's laid out in your book. But basically, there's a number of different steps. Please read through them because you're going to be working on a lot of this related to your project. But let's just talk through them briefly. So the first is kind of a stoplight analysis where you're looking at the total picture and kind of saying, okay, you know, what are we trying to do? You will also test future business scenarios at this step. So you can say, okay, what will happen if this happens? And what will happen if this happens? To kind of play those things out for yourself. The next is that individual action planning and identifying. So looking at your team, who needs to be developed? What are your challenges and unanswered questions related to those people? And do you have any problems or management problems of those people that could impact your project that you want to be aware of? The next is once you have that map, then you're going to start moving forward with the routes that you've mapped out. So starting to lay those plans, starting to get those people in place to lead this change effort. Sometimes there could be warning signs of problems, so you definitely do want to look at that and be aware of that as you're implementing a change process. And finally, you're going to develop a go-forward plan. So what that kind of gets into is you know, you're kind of detailing the types of change, you're documenting people issues and implications, you're ensuring that your organization is ready for the change, and then you're creating those individual plans. Those individual plans are really important because that lays out what each team member is going to do, if you have developmental needs for those team members, and kind of what role they're going to play going forward. So please do take some time and look through that roadmap. And you know, let me know if you guys have any questions about that as you're kind of going through. So a couple of things about this week's assignment. The first is a discussion. The discussion is due on Thursday evening, as you guys know. So that discussion post this week really gets around looking at either the organization that you're part of or looking at the organization that you're doing your project on and answering some questions. So those questions are what changes are occurring in your organization. So what are those change efforts that are being led? What is forcing them? Why are we changing? Typically change, we don't just change for fun. It's not human nature to want to do that. There's usually some type of compelling reason, whether it's a business need, whether it's a cost-saving measure, whether it's a need to do this to keep up with the market, those types of things. So be aware of what is the driving force kind of behind the change. It kind of helps lay things out when you do that. Additionally, what are the signs of resistance in this organization? Are there D players that are kind of sabotaging? Are there grumblings or rumors of people being unhappy or saying that they're happy, but in reality they're not? Those are things to look for. And also, are the changes good or bad? And that's just your perspective on it. And that can be either that the change itself, the project, is good or bad, or it could be how it's being implemented, because certainly a change program that's not implemented well, although in the best of intentions, could wind up actually being very bad for the group of people working through it. So that's what your online discussion is about. So please post. Please look at your colleagues or your fellow students' posts, and you know, post back to them. And you know, we want the discussion to be lively, so please do so, especially as people start to share things about organizations, and it kind of gets fun with some of the examples and scenarios that we've all found ourselves in. Anyway, and okay, so then there's also the written assignment for this week. So last week you developed a set of questions for the business that you're doing for your organizational development project, which is kind of throughout the course through the assignments. And so you're really the consultant on this basis. So you want to have a meeting with those people and start to ask them these questions, finding out about what changes are going on. Who are the change agents? How is change done? What are the challenges that they're running into? So look at that list of questions that you developed last week. I'm sure if you're struggling to come up with a good question in a given area, your peers are a great place to look for some other suggestions of questions to ask. But basically, what you're going to do is you're going to have that meeting, and then you're going to do a brief write-up on it. I want you to tell me kind of what you found out about your organization, as well as to answer the questions that are in the module rubric. So please do take a look at those. Let me know if you have any questions, and that assignment is due Saturday evening, not Sunday, Saturday, and they will be due on Saturdays going forward. So just keep that in mind. As always, if anyone has questions, please let me know. I am working on starting to grade the assignments from last week and get back to you guys with feedback. So you should be hearing from me in the next day or so, well, probably a day or two, on that, as well as my participation in the discussions and things like that. So please reach out to me, please email me, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help. But I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you all, well, not really, but you'll see me next week. Thanks.